What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Smoking Tire Podcast. Today's episode is brought to you by Off the Record. We love Off the Record, and you should love Off the Record. Why should you love Off the Record? Because they're there to help. They're there to help you. They're there to help you stay out of trouble. They're there to help you exit the system whereby the government and insurance companies extract money from you, citizen, just for going a little fast. You don't want to deal with that. Never, ever, ever plead guilty to a moving violation. That is the easiest money that you will ever feed into a system unnecessarily. Instead, you could just use Off the Record. They are an amazing service that helps you get those points from a moving violation off of your record. They do that by fighting those tickets on your behalf. You don't even have to really do anything beyond inform them that you got a ticket in the first place. You just go to offtherecord.com/TST or download the Off the Record app and use code TST10. And then you have those accounts made, right? And then if you get a ticket, you just take a photo of that ticket or scan that ticket, send it to Off the Record. They take care of the rest. They will pair you up with a qualified attorney in the jurisdiction where you got the ticket, and they'll fight that ticket for you. You don't have to go to court. They'll go to court for you. You don't have to meet with the prosecutor. They'll meet with the prosecutor for you. They'll deal with it. And then in almost every instance, and I mean the vast, vast majority of instances, they will get those points off of your record, and you don't have to do anything. You didn't even know it happened. It's just poof, donezo. In fact, if they can't get the points off your record, they're so confident that they can, that if they can't, it's a money-back guarantee. But you want to have your account ready. That way, if you get pulled over, you don't panic. You're not, what am I going to do? I can't afford this. Freak out, anxiety attack. You have Off the Record in your back pocket. You got the app on your phone. You got the account on the computer. Offtherecord.com/TST or code TST10 on the app will save you 10% off all legal services that you book through Off the Record. Great folks, kind folks, and I get emails all the time from folks who have used them, and they're like, oh my God, this actually did work as well as you said it did. It's amazing. Off the Record is the jam, and we love them. Code TST10 on the app, people. Alrighty, folks, today it's a very special day because a really, really talented human being is joining us all the way from France. Mr. David Twohig is an author, an engineer, a project lead on some very cool cars, including, not least of which was the Alpine A110, the modern reinterpretation. He also writes for the Intercooler. We talk about some of the things that you guys may not know what goes into the development of a car, how pennies get pinched, how priorities get shifted, how decisions get passed through meetings. We run some of the existing conundrums of our day past David, and he gives his input on maybe why things were done certain ways, why certain decisions were made. It's so interesting. His book, Inside the Machine, is available now. Everybody should buy it. Both Zach and I read it, and it is amazing look inside how cars get developed. We have a link in the show notes to buy David's book, and everybody should and read it. It is mandatory reading, and we're very happy to have him. This is a super interesting show. David Twohig is on the Smoking Tire Podcast. I hear there's an echo in all of England, actually. I hear it's the whole country.
Well, I'm actually speaking to you guys from sunny France. So I'm based in France. So yeah, just across the channel.
Perfect.
With
Okay.
Alpine.
Well, then I guess that echo in England thing is really blown
I called him
up,
British
isn't it?
before, and he's like, I was born in Ireland. I was like,
Yeah.
good start.
Yeah, this is going well.
Sorry, go
But
ahead.
I'm really pumped to be on the #1 Canadian podcast. I mean, I'm so excited.
Well done.
All right. Well, we exist now. This is great. David Twohig, thank you very much for joining us from France today, and it's the evening for you. So you're probably what, 2 bottles of wine and a wheel of cheese deep at this point.
I am a half a cup of coffee deep, Matt, and yeah, it's a pleasure to be with you and Zach. How are you guys doing?
Good. We both read your book, Inside the Machine, and unfortunately we shared a copy. But I'll buy another just for fun. I'll buy another, and we'll give it away to a fan who finds the idea interesting. And of course, you write for the Intercooler, and I really like your writing. That's where Zach found you, and went to the book, and then I read it as well. And man, you've had a career, haven't you?
Well, I guess I have, and I got to really say thanks to Zach for picking up on the book and recommending it to you guys. And I was actually listening to that episode where Zach was praising it and doing his best to pronounce all these weird French names. Doing a good job of it. So thanks to Zach.
Well, one of the things that stood out to me, obviously, the book, for someone who does what we do, it's hard to, when you drive a car, either you like it or you don't, or you like something about it, you don't like something about it. And it's always kind of hard to remember that there are humans, and there's this giant sort of system behind that car. And decisions are made in sort of endless series of meetings, and so many people and so many inputs and so many priorities. And I think this book really helps to humanize that process.
And I'm glad you picked up on that, Matt, because the title "Inside the Machine," right, is kind of reflect that a little bit. The industry is a machine. Some of these bigger companies are well over 100,000 employees. And it is a big industrial machine, lots of money, lots of profitability talk. But exactly as you say, behind it, there are men and women designing every little nut, bolt, and washer on your car. And, the cars I've been lucky enough to be involved with, when I look at them, I don't see the car. I see the taillight that Trevor did. I see, that suspension that Matt did. I remember, the guy who did that switchgear and the fight we had about it. So I just see the people, and I wanted to get across a little sense of that, yeah.
And I do want to come back to that, because the other thing that struck me about your career, particularly as told through this book, is that you're born in Ireland, but you very quickly find yourself in Japan, and literally working and doing a very difficult job in a completely different language. And then having to do it again when you go back to France. And so, that to me, having a hard job to begin with, speaking the language of engineering, but also the language of corporations, and having to do it in languages not your own twice seems incredibly difficult.
And I think I was just so lucky with my career, because I joined Nissan, as you said, early 90s, 1992, straight out of college, fresh-faced kid with an electronics engineering degree. And I was recruited by Nissan. Now, at the time, the early 90s, Nissan were expanding overseas, right? So they were actually quite an outward-looking Japanese company. So they, first of all, established an R&D center in Detroit. They'd obviously been already producing cars in the US for a long time. And they decided they needed a factory and R&D capabilities in Europe, and hired a bunch of local kids like myself. And it was a really exciting time in the Japanese car industry, maybe a little bit like we saw with the South Korean makers a couple of years back. And yeah, you're right. I was very lucky to get the chance to go to Japan a few years later. So here was this kid, out of the small town in Ireland, and I find myself flying into Narita Airport and going through these crazy places in Japan to lead a development team in Nissan's R&D center in Yokohama. Yeah.
Landing in Tokyo is very intimidating, isn't it? It's such an enormous place as you're flying over it. You're like, where am I?
And this was long before Google Maps and everything.
Yeah. And I mean, even now when you fly, what I love about flying to Tokyo is it's one of those places where you land and you realize, like, I'm in a foreign country. If you're a Westerner, right? It's not like anywhere else. And in the early 90s, it certainly wasn't. There wasn't yet McDonald's and Starbucks in every corner. You weren't going to find someone who spoke English. You couldn't read anything. And it was a hell of an adventure just to visit the country. And then actually leading a development team, developing a car for the first time. When I was a kid, I was only in like my early 30s. that was kind of a double adventure.
Yeah, I mean, you got pretty far pretty fast in terms of your age and what your rank and responsibilities were. I mean, you were right in what became Qashqai. Is it Americans can't pronounce it. Is it Qashqai? It is Qashqai, right?
Don't worry about it. Nobody can pronounce the name of this car.
Can we just talk about the name? What was the meeting like where the best possible answer was Qashqai?
Well, it's not an accident that the version of the car sold in North America is called Rogue Sport, right?
Yeah.
You can actually say that. You're very practical people in America. So,
Yeah, they knew. They're like, they're not going to get
it. Yeah, it was one of those naming conventions. It was a concept car, but when the concept car was shown in Frankfurt, it actually stuck and people liked it. But really, nobody can pronounce it. But yeah, it was I was really lucky because at that time, when I joined Nissan, it was still 7 years before the whole Nissan Alliance thing, Carlos Ghosn, and all of those, pretty seismic events. And Nissan was a very traditional company, right? To get ahead, it was time, it was seniority. You bided your time, you worked your way up through the corporate ladder. But when Carlos Ghosn came in 1999, all of that went out of the window. So all of this seniority rules about being promoted, getting to a certain grade, having to be a certain age, Ghosn basically said, no, we're going to promote people on talent. And for whatever reason, I got pushed up the ranks and found myself in the position of basically chief vehicle engineer, which is what Nissan calls someone when they give you, okay, dude, you now get to play with a whole car rather than just bits and pieces or modules of a car. We're going to give you a whole car. Yeah, and I think I was 31, I think, when I went, and I was the youngest chief vehicle engineer by quite a long shot. And I was also the only one with
blue eyes. A lot of responsibility.
That's a lot.
With blue eyes. Yeah.
What's so cool, or maybe interesting and educational to me, is that you were an electrical engineer. Or that was what your degree was in. But then in a few years after proving yourself with different electrical systems, you end up in charge of the entire vehicle. And my brain always thought, oh, if you're going to build, the entire machine, a lot of it's made of metal, you have to be a mechanical engineer or a chassis engineer. But it seems like, once you're an engineer, you have the right brain and process, and then you can learn the steps that are needed and the skills that are needed to apply it to a different medium? Or how did that happen?
I would 100% agree with what you just said, that kind of engineering is engineering. But you're right. In the 90s, right up to we'll talk about EVs in a moment, I'm sure, but pre-EVs, chief vehicle engineers, they were almost all powertrain guys or body and white guys. And they were the elite, right? The heart of the car was the engine. The good engineers worked in powertrains. You didn't get to be a chief vehicle engineer until you'd done your time in powertrain. So I was highly unusual. Not only was I not Japanese, I was not a powertrain engineer. I was a lot younger than the other guys. So yeah, I was an outsider in many respects. But actually, you know what? That was always a huge advantage to me. Being an outsider has always helped me right through my career.
What do you think is the real difference between developing a car, because your three major projects, and I'm sure you've worked on other stuff, but the three ones in the book, you've got the Qashqai, which is a compact crossover, which was sort of right at the beginning of what became one of the biggest segments, if not the biggest segment in cars today. Then you had the Renault Zoe, which was an electric car. And then, of course, the Alpine A110, which is probably what our audience cares about the most. What is really some of the crucial differences between the processes of designing and engineering mass market cars versus lower volume niche market enthusiast cars?
All three projects have their differences, obviously, right? The first vehicle, like you said, relatively conventional vehicle. Okay, some people claim it created the kind of C-segment crossover that certainly dominates in Europe and Asia these days. Not so much in the States, but
Well, we are tax incentivized to buy Super Duty pickup trucks, sir. Recognize our financial reward system, please. Capitalism, yay, unless you want a giant truck, and then we will subsidize you.
So that was the challenge for that vehicle, was really, creating this new segment. The challenge for the Zoe EV, the difference there, especially in 2008, because the development of that car was between 2007 2012. EVs were really new. You couldn't just phone up the tier one supplier and say, hey, I need a DC-DC converter. I need an inverter. They didn't exist, so therefore everything had to be designed in-house. I'm sure we'll come back to the Alpine A110, but the challenge there was weight management, right? It was all about pounds and the ounces and the grams, and I'm sure we'll come back to that. But I'd rather underline the common thread between the three of them, and this is really, really boring, and your listeners are probably going to turn off now, but the common thread between the three is actually cost management.
Right.
Because it's one thing making a car that's not going to lose money is really tough. And all of the vehicles I've worked on have been relatively affordable. Even the A110, I mean, in US dollars, it's coming in at around 65,000 US dollars. It's not a super expensive vehicle. So the common thread between the three projects is cost management, not just of the pieces of the car, but the investment, the manpower, the hundreds of millions of dollars or billions of dollars that get spent on these. So that's probably the common thread you have to do, and you have to get. One thing that drives me crazy, Matt, is the old Bob Lutz thing of bean counters versus engineers.
Right.
I actually don't like that trope, because if you want to be a good engineer and you want to get stuff into production, you have to be able to count beans.
I think Bob Lutz, and he's probably going to show up at my door with a gun, but I think Bob Lutz is overrated. I know a lot of people in America don't feel that way, and Bob Lutz is like a god, but he had a lot of bombs. Like, he had a lot of stuff under his watch that was straight up not good. He has a lot of takes about stuff that are straight up not good. I'm not a Bob Lutz worshiper.
I think I just heard someone at the door there. I heard someone banging on the door.
Open the door.
Yeah, someone. Bob Lutz is going to show up with a cigar, an 8-foot cigar, and a can of gasoline, and burn my building down for saying that.
Yeah, and then do push-ups while you cry.
I think a lot of our, it's all from that photo with the rolled opal with his foot up on there like Captain Morgan, that he earned his reputation.
I mean, I think he was in charge of a lot of really good programs, but he's in the game so long that there were also stumbles that also could be part of the larger machine. Like if like the John Coletti episode, there were so many things that he wanted to do, and then the team he was working with would say, well, we've never done that before. And he was like, well, then fucking figure it out. Yeah. You never know.
Yeah. So let's talk about costs, because it is a recurring theme of your book. It is no matter the car, like you just said, whether it's a crossover or an EV or a sports car, how finely calculated are the costs of parts? You talk about arguing a couple times in the book for fractions of pennies.
Yep. So let's talk about mass market cars, right? So I'm not talking about high-end Porsches. I'm not talking about Ferraris, but I'm talking about mass market cars, the majority of cars we drive, right? The very, very best in the business, and we're talking Volkswagen, Toyota, BMW on their good days. You can look this up in their corporate accounts, right? I'm not giving away any industry secrets. They make consolidated profit on their products of somewhere around 5 to 7%. 7% will be a good day, okay? Now, the secret of that is, let's take that 7%. About 3% of that is on sales and service. It's when you take your car in to get, an oil change. It's when you change brake pads, etc. So the product itself is making about a 4% margin. There is no other industry, guys, that I can think of that has such fine margins. Yeah. So if you get the cost of the parts you're buying wrong by 2%, you've halved your profit margin. You're out of the game. You're dead in the water. So there is no other industry that I can think of that has such huge upfront investments, such paper-thin margins. Therefore, everything has to be finely engineered in terms of cost. Now, I know that's super boring. I'm sorry to everyone listening that's not an accountant.
No,
but
it's
the
not.
fact
It's that's the reality. We get we get a lot of criticism from people, and I don't think it's founded, but we get criticism from people for like telling the truth about things, and they want us you're my escape from my shitty day job. I don't want to hear about real life from you. I want to hear supercars in fantasy land. But that is the reality of does that change if you're talking about a McLaren or a Ferrari or something that is at the upper tier? I mean, I once talked to my friend Maz, who is the guy who really runs Singer, the 911 folks, right? Not Rob, the artist, you know, the guy, the accountant, right? And I said, you know, we were talking about his new DLS thing, the dynamic and lightweighting study, this incredible thing. And I said, yeah, you know, it's like $2 million, right? I guys, you guys must be really killing it right now for $2 million. And he goes, let me tell you something, friend. When it costs $2 million to make, you know, it's not exactly the same thing when you're selling it for 2.1, you know, after a year of building. So, yeah.
100%. And, you know, I've worked with some, you know, niche boutique makers as well. And I'm going to say the cost challenge is just as difficult, but the emphasis changes. So in other words, rather than getting obsessive about the cost of each part, right, the actual bits you're buying, you have to get really obsessive about the fixed costs, the tooling costs, the prototype costs. So that's where someone like Maz at Singer, or the guys in McLaren, or the guys in Gordon Murray, those guys have to be really disciplined on their fixed costs. They can spend a bit more on the fancy titanium bits, the carbon fiber bits, sure, but they can't blow $2 million on a lighting tool like Nissan or Renault or GM will do, you know, before breakfast. So they've got to be really disciplined on the fixed costs.
Yeah.
That's probably why they use the same tub for as long as they do, right? Because you build this tooling to make a carbon tub and you have to make it last as long as possible.
For sure. And why, you know, even the top end supercars, the most difficult bits are often things like lighting or switch gear.
Yeah.
Right? Because switch gear is incredibly expensive to tool, and those guys don't have the deep pockets, so they try and get carryover switch gear, disguise it as best they can. But that's
Yeah.
That's it. So
Yeah,
switch gear is one of the more expensive things.
The famous Lamborghini Nissan headlights on the Diablo, all that kinds of stuff.
Window switches and stuff. And that's why parts sharing exists.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Well,
also why haptic buttons, I take it, are probably such a way for them to save money, right? Because they just have to make a black panel with a click button and not some physical moving thing, right?
Yeah, and it's part of the temptation as well, why a touch screen can, in certain circumstances, save you money, right? And why we see a little bit of overuse in touch screen in cars these days. But, you know, the numbers are huge. If you take a simple under steering wheel switchgear, right? Turn signals, lights, wipers, you know, basic stuff. To tool one of those up from scratch these days, you're talking about $8 million just for that, right?
Yeah.
So the numbers are astronomical for these parts, and you know, boutique makers can't afford that.
All right, folks, got to take a quick break from the action because Factor is here. It's summer. You got to be looking for wholesome and convenient meals for sunny and active days. For me, summer means the busy season. It means we're filming. It means cars are coming in and out of the shop. It means travel. It means I'm running around, and it means I need to focus on eating healthy and eating, period. Because sometimes I actually skip meals, which is really unhealthy because there isn't something easy, healthy, and convenient to eat. So with Factor, it's great. You got the nutritious and ready-to-eat meals delivered straight to your door, and then I keep them in the fridge here at the shop, so when I get back from a long shoot, 6 hours up on the mountain from 6 a.m. to noon, I'm starving, and I need to have food like right now, and I need it to be healthy, and I need it to be tasty, and that's where Factor comes in. I'm too busy to go to the store. I don't want to order some unhealthy takeout food. I certainly don't want to stop at fast food. and that's why Factor is the jam. Their fresh, never frozen meals are ready in just 2 minutes, so all you have to do is heat and enjoy, and then get back to your activities, get back to work, get back to play, get back to your family, what have you. And if you're looking for calorie-conscious options for the summer, try delicious, dietitian-approved, calorie-smart wheat meals with at or around or less 550 calories per serving. If you need an extra boost to support your wellness goals, try the Protein Plus meals with 30 grams of protein or more per serving. Those are the ones I go for. I'm on a protein-heavy diet right now, so all the protein I can shove into my face, that's what I'm going with. They got new upscale surf and turf and surf meal options, roasted garlic filet mignon and shrimp, Cajun spice shrimp and salmon. Yummy. They got keto stuff, vegan stuff, vegetarian stuff, protein stuff, everything for any type of diet you're on. Factor has got it. If you want to budget this month by cutting back on takeout, just go with Factor instead. It's cheaper than takeout, it's faster than takeout, and in many cases, it's better for you as well. Head over to factormeals.com/tire50, factormeals.com/tire50, and use code TIRE50 to get 50% off your first box. That's code TIRE50 at factormeals.com/tire50 to get 50% off your first box. And thanks to Factor for sponsoring today's show. I remember in 2010 when Ford updated the Shelby GT500 from the 07 to 09 model, which was a massive turd, to the 10 model, which was a great car. One of their changes, very small, most people don't even notice, is they went from a badge about, this big, small Shelby badge, to spreading the Shelby letters across the whole trunk. And the chief design engineer at SVT told me that was $2 million to make that change. And how many how many Shelbys did they sell? So it's like, it's
not
probably like, yeah, not $2 million. It's probably $25 a car, to make that change. It's that kind of stuff adds up really fast. What is some of the most, if you can recall, sort of biggest spend for smallest return, if you will, in some of those cars?
Oh, yeah. I'm trying to think. I remember the chrome badge when we did the Zoe, which is a small. I got to explain this to your audience who may not have seen a Zoe. So basically,
we have a photo of the Zoe.
Yeah. So basically, the Renault Zoe is the better-looking French sister of a Nissan Leaf. That's the summary of it.
It is a good-looking car. I like this hatchback.
Thank you, sir. So it was developed at the same time as the Leaf. You guys will be very familiar with the Leaf.
Mm-hmm.
This was actually the best-selling EV in Europe for many years. It was knocked off its perch a couple of years ago by the Tesla 3, but that was my baby, and I'm very proud of it. So you can't quite see it in that image, but the chrome on the car, that front emblem, we wanted something that would show the car was electric because it was a bit different. And some of the guys in the design studio came up with the great idea of, wouldn't it be cool if it was like a sort of a translucent blue rather than just silver? I won't tell you the numbers on the tooling to make blue chrome, but I can tell you that it was deep into the seven figures. And also,
oh, here we go.
The process meant that it couldn't be done in Europe because some of the chemicals you had to use to make blue chrome had been outlawed in Europe. There you go. You can see it there.
Yes, it's very important to use very dangerous chemicals when making your green car. It's very important. We must outsource this to a country with no EPA.
So I'm ashamed to say that badge was purchased from a country I will not name, where they had, let's say, a lower value on human life.
Oh, no. Yeah. Yeah,
so that badge caused us a lot of headaches, but it looks good.
It looks great, and you got
phrase.
looks like some blue chrome trim on the inside of the front mouth there, or that may just be the photo.
No, we got it on that as well.
There
But
you go.
again, a story. Just talking about that chrome, the detail you have to do, because we hadn't used that chrome before. And you can't just buy it, get it done in some country, and get them shipped in. that chrome had to be tested, of course, in an Arizona desert. It had to be exposed to the Arizona Death Valley sun load test, and it also had to undergo the car wash test, right? So the car wash test is you bring your car into a particularly aggressive rollover car wash with very dirty brushes, and you do that every day for 3 years.
Oh, and wait, every day? So every day for 3 years, meaning like you would. So in testing, would somebody with a prototype vehicle, you know, maybe covered in these badges, have to go through a car wash like 200 times?
Yes, sir. So that was part of our durability test. So the vehicles go through gravel tests, salt spray. You imagine 24 hours a day, and part of the test was the guys going repeatedly through a rollover. Which was
glamorous job as prototype testing.
Yeah. What do you think is driving the young people's interest in those 90s cars? Because I kind of forgot. You all had access to most of those. So what's driving them to go back a couple generations?
That's a damn good question. I got to ask one of my colleagues on the intercooler, Joe Fidalgo. Joe is a big JDM fan. She drives a Suzuki Cappuccino. I need to ask Joe for a definitive answer, but I think it's partly the movies, right? We gotta kind of tip the hat to Fast and Furious. Like, the people are revisiting the early ones, especially Tokyo Drift. You know, it's quite a cool movie.
Love
so
that one. Yeah.
You gotta give a little bit of credit to that, but also I think they're just rediscovering some of the old rally footage. You know, some of the WRC stuff from that era. I mean, it's just awesome to watch. YouTube is full of it. And also they're solid cars, you know, mechanically they're pretty easy to work on. A lot of the electronics has been remanufactured. So they're not that difficult cars to restore and to run. So yeah, I think a combination of all those, this is just they're just cool as hell.
I mean, they look good. They have such a different shape because it was before pedestrian crash standards. Not that they didn't exist, but you know, they changed a lot. I'm sure you can speak to that. But if you look at the profile of, like yesterday, we had a guest, Bucky Lasik, who's a professional skateboarder, and he owns 5 Impreza 2.5 RSs. Huge fan of them. And if you look at the profile of that car, the hood is so low, whereas the modern ones, it's a lot taller and thicker because of pedestrian crash standards. So the accessibility of the mechanics, and they're affordable to buy and easy to work on, it kind of makes sense that people are more drawn to that stuff. He's saying JDM stuff is really popular, resurging in popularity in Europe right now, even though they could buy it before, like we couldn't, but it's just a combination of media and accessibility. Yeah.
Guys, got to take another quick break from the action for Caldera Lab. This stuff is clutch. You know what the problem is with skincare? It's so heavily female driven that men, you know, especially like manly men, we just don't think about it that often. And then before you know it, you're in your 40s and your skin is tired, it's dry, it's itchy, it's red, it doesn't look great, but there is something you can do about it, and you don't have to be an expert. You don't have to do a lot of research. The Caldera Lab stuff, which they sent me last week, and it is great. It's a full regimen. Right? You don't have to think. It's just easily labeled. It's high-performance men's skincare, clinically proven to reduce wrinkles, fine lines, and signs of aging. Caldera Lab is the leader in men's skincare and is here to save the day, right? All you got to do is open the regimen bundle. Inside, you'll find the skincare dream team. You got the clean slate, the base layer, and the good. The clean slate, it starts and ends your day. Okay, it's face wash. It leaves all types of skin refreshed and hydrated. Okay, then there's the base layer. That's your daily moisturizer, hydrates your skin, absorbs fast, leaving you with a matte finish so you can start your day. And then the good is your go-to at night before bed multifunctional serum that helps your skin look tighter and smoother and reduces visibility of wrinkles and fine lines. It's full of antioxidants protecting your skin. Right? That's it. They even have this eye serum called the Icon. It addresses the 3 most common skin concerns around the eyes: fine lines, dark circles, and puffiness. Those items in the bundle, in the regimen bundle, are all you need, right? It's clean slate, base layer, the good, plus the icon. That's it. It's all you need. Whole skincare regimen. Caldera Lab is made with top-tier ingredients. It's a great addition to your daily routine. Takes less than a minute morning and night, and you can reduce your wrinkles, lines, puffiness, and signs of aging. Avoid being the butt of everyone's joke and take the leap to skincare royalty with Caldera Lab. And now you can get 20% off with our code TIRE at calderalab.com. That's 20% off at CALDERALAB.com by using code TIRE. Take your health to the next level in skincare with calderalab.com, code TIRE. Bird Dogs, they have these new stretch khaki shorts, and they are amazing. Summer's here, shorts is here. In California, we've only got 2 seasons, kind of chilly and death hot. And so when it gets to death hot, the jeans go away, the shorts come out, and that's where Bird Dogs come in. They're designed to fit slimmer through the thigh and leg, giving you a sculpted look, but without giving up the fit, right? Lululemon, they do the same thing, but Bird Dogs does it better because they have this cloud knit fabric that looks like khaki, but it stretches, so you get the benefits of the slimmer fit with the look, but you get the movement from those big, boxy, stiff cotton shorts that you're used to. Bird Dogs has an anti-stink and sweat-wicking fabric that keeps you cool and dry all day long. They sent me some of these shorts, and they are great. They're comfortable. They look good. You can wear them in a sort of semi-professional environment, and they keep me dry. They keep me from smelling, and I can wear them while working out too. They're awesome. Super comfortable stuff. Go to birddogs.com/tire and enter promo code TIRE for a free Yeti-style tumbler with your order. That's birddogs.com/tire and then code TIRE also for a free Yeti-style tumbler. You won't want to take off these Bird Dogs. They are great. Back to the action. So I'm so bummed that we don't get the Alpine A110 here. I thought maybe we would get it under a Nissan banner. They kept kind of teasing us that maybe we would get it. It's such a pretty car. It seems like the kind of thing that us enthusiasts would really want.
The fact that a number of journalists have bought them.
Yeah.
Journalists that don't have a ton of money have bought them, and everyone just celebrates how it drives. When
Gordon Murray buys one,
yeah,
you're in good shape, I think.
Oops.
Matt, I don't get a lot of hate mail, right? Apart from people who can't pronounce Qashqai, but I get a lot of hate mail still for the A110. Like, please stop telling us how good it is and how lightweight it is and how agile it is, because we can't fucking buy one. So yeah, and all I can say is, sorry guys, you just gotta wait another 22 years until you can import one.
Right.
It's gonna go real quick.
Or move to France.
It's it's so interesting reading about your team and how much focus was put on weight, because us enthusiasts, we always talk about how we want lightweight, and yet the mainstream manufacturers, even Porsche, even Ferrari, they don't really seem to listen to that. I mean, Ferrari just came out with a 1,000 horsepower hybrid that is like ridiculously heavy and ridiculously expensive. Even the 296 GTB is 3,700 pounds and change. Porsche does a decent job, but they still value features over weight savings with all but their most hardcore models. Why do you think that the rest of the industry is unwilling to focus on weight?
Unfortunately, it's a pretty easy answer, Matt. It's a really hard sell. And I kept reminding my team at Alpine that, guys, remember, mass is not an attribute. The customer does not feel mass. The customer feels acceleration, longitudinal, and the customer feels acceleration, lateral and vertical. So the word agility is actually what you're achieving. And agility is a really hard thing to sell. So I can sell you 0 to 60 times all day long. I can show you videos of, drag races all day long. I can add power to the car. All that stuff's really easy. Telling you how the car feels agile is very hard to sell. And the only way I can sell it actually is to get you to sit in the car. And then you understand it in the first 50 yards. But it's a really hard thing to sell. And let's be realistic about the Alpine A110. So it's been a smash hit with the media, right? It's blown all of the records in terms of 5-star reviews, 10-star reviews. The number of journalists who bought them with their own money is, the list is very, very long. You will not meet anyone who's driven one who will say anything other than that this is a great car. But let's look at the sales figures. It still gets its ass kicked in the market by the Cayman, by the Audi TT. So it's really, really hard to sell. So I actually think the legacy of the A110 will not be in its sales figures per se, but in the influence it's had on its competitors. Because I do think it's making Porsche, Ferrari, BMW look harder at mass and how we can manage it. So if it had a slight influence in pushing the mass agenda up the priority list, then I'm really proud to have contributed to that, even if it's just a little bit.
Do you think some of the sales, I guess, being slower than the journalist take rate is because you relaunched a new brand that people are unfamiliar with, and you're trying to convince them to come and jump in this new thing?
Sure, ton of things. I mean, that also the fact that it's made by the Renault Group, right? Alpine is a brand owned by the Renault Group, so it's not Porsche, it's not Ferrari, it's not BMW. You basically say, hang on, this is Renault, right? They make little hatchbacks, little quirky French stuff. It's easy to persuade someone to go into a Porsche dealer and sit in a Cayman. It's harder to persuade that same person to come to this thing called an Alpine showroom and sit in this little blue thing. So yeah, that's a lot tougher. But it's a car, the whole marketing ethos of the car is you just got to get people in there, drive it, and you've got a sale before they've got 50 yards.
How did the new Alpina stick to its guns about lightness? Because it's owned by Renault, which makes cars, mass market cars that can be as heavy as their competitors. And what was it about relaunching this brand that you and the team were able to stick to this mission of let's keep it incredibly light? I know the original cars weighed like 800. They were something crazy light, but they could have changed that if they wanted to.
Yeah. And the original cars built back in the 70s, I mean, those cars are incredibly small. I mean, really, really small. Folks who are over like 6'1" physically cannot get in them, and you don't even want to think about crashing one. It's made out of fiberglass. You're basically sitting on the fuel tank. Not good. But anyway, that was back in the day. I'm going to give the credit to two things for that, Zach. So first of all, I mean, the car had a really powerful sponsor from day one, and that sponsor, I'm going to give me kudos, it's Carlos Tavares, right? He was the big boss these days of Stellantis. He was the car guy. He was the guy who said, look, we got to build this. He persuaded the big bosses, Carlos Ghosn at the time, and the board of directors that we should take a flyer on this. And he was the guy who said to me and the team, look, guys, if you can't manage the mass, you're going to screw this up. So mass it's all about the mass. So part of the answer is Carlos Tavares. The second part of the answer is really, we played the old Skunk Works rule book. So, the old Lockheed Martin Skunk Works rule book. If you want to do something different like this, you create a small team, you separate them from the mothership, you put them in a building, you give them a small budget, and you give them control. And we had that really rare thing in the modern industry. There was a small team of us, just about 100 people, physically put into a different site, and we were told to rip up the rule book. We were given a very small amount of money and a fixed time and said, get on with it. And that's super rare, guys. I cannot tell you how rare that is in the industry. And that's the reason we were able to keep control over the mass.
It's and the other thing you spent a lot of time on in the book is talking about the need to not have a rear wing. And I feel like whenever we talk to a lot of Europeans, they make a really, whether it's you or Gordon or some other folks we've talked to who have been involved in car design in Europe, they make a big deal out of not having a rear wing, that it ruins the lines of the car. And I see your perspective, but we go the other way in America. we either can't make a car without a wing, but they find ways to feature it, or it's a big deal to have the wing. So why was it so important to not have a wing? And talk about the lengths to which you guys went to not have that wing.
So do you think the guys are working on the Plymouth Barracuda? We're trying to, okay, we'll try and do it without a wing, but really miss the target.
I just saw recently, one of these muscle car auctions where someone had built a sort of what if car, which was a Superbird, with the big, meter high wing, right? And the nose cone, but it was conceptualizing that as a convertible. And you think that car looks dumb as a coupe. It's like, it looks
like a boat.
It is a horror show. Yeah, it looks like a Riva.
It just looks like like an actual speedboat with a wing on it. You can tow wakeboarders behind you.
Yeah, that's awful.
That's terrible.
Yeah.
But to get back to your question, Matt, a couple of things. So first of all, was obviously the whole, once again, like a broken record, right? Was this whole mass thing, because whether you have a fixed wing or an electrically deployable wing, it's all mass, right? And we were fighting not for pounds and ounces, but for grams. So that was our first driver. Second driver was, we really did want to kind of do, pay our respects to the original Berlinette, that car we just showed in the image, so the 1970s original. And when you look at that car, particularly in a straight side view, it has a very particular curve to the rear, the rear quarters, and there was no spoiler. So the chief designer, a guy called, good buddy of mine called Anthony Villon, Anthony was really keen that we tried to emulate that. Not like pastiche it, not rip it off, but just kind of not tip our hats to it. So we spent a lot of work, a lot of time in the wind tunnel, to get the rear diffuser to really, really work, not just be something that looked cool from the car behind when you're looking at the car from the rear, but actually functionally worked. And we managed it. But the good news is, if you like a wing on your Alpine, since then there's the R version, which is kind of the racing version. And you can get a wing on it as well if you want. But the purest,
I've seen that one. Is there? Zach? Can you get a picture of the Alpine R? Yeah. I want to see what the wing.
A110R.
Oh yeah, okay. Yeah, it's got like a black hood. It's got black roof. It's got some different wheels.
So I just want to.
There we go. Yeah.
So that's the normal one.
It does look good without it. I'm not.
It looks so good.
I'm not saying that I am necessarily pro wing if it's not necessary, but there's pages about that rear 3/4 fender and the way how difficult it was to manufacture and why it was so important to get that right, as well as to not have the wing. Would you say it's true that curves cost a lot of money?
I could make such a politically incorrect comment there, Matt, but I'm resisting it. For sure, especially on aluminum, stamping aluminum that thin, because it's got really, really thin panels, this car, and we were pushing those forms right to the edge. And I tell the story in the book. I won't bore you guys with the details of it here, where the computer simulation of the press process told us that this wouldn't work. It will crack. And we kind of took the brave pill and said, hey, computer's probably being a bit pessimistic, and went for it anyway. Guess what? The computer was right, and it was an absolute nightmare to get it to work. So some of these gray hairs you see here are due to that rear 3/4 on that car, but all worth it.
When you're, the overall project vehicle manager for this big team doing this big car, how small does your job get? For instance, we were talking about a car yesterday. We were driving the new Audi RS5, and we were talking about which is a lovely car, and we were talking about the specific behavior of the radar cruise control system, specifically how it, when you set the follow distance and the car in front accelerated, and how big the sort of rubber band effect would be before it caught up. And when you're designing a vehicle, and it's got a system like that, or any other small, nuanced, fundamentally software-based decisions. Are you getting involved in the nitty-gritty of how that car behaves, or is it much more how it looks, how it drives and the structure and the materials and things like that?
Yeah, that's such a great question, Matt. And I'm an old soldier in the industry these days, so I get a lot of time now to train the folks who are now leading the projects in the future. And we often discuss this, right? And one of the advice I give to up and coming chief vehicle engineers is you cannot get into the weeds on every technical detail. You cannot. If you try, you're going to burn yourself out and you're going to piss off your team because they're going to figure out, okay, here's a guy who doesn't trust us, doesn't know how to delegate. But here's the thing, you have to have the nose, you have to sense where you do need to get into the weeds. So let's say it's the cruise control. Let's say that gentleman responsible for that car, that person, I don't know if it was a gentleman or a lady, statistically it was probably a dude, they need to have the sense to say, okay, there's an issue here with the cruise control, I gotta get into the detail. And here's the thing, when you decide to deep dive, when you decide to put on the scuba gear and you're gonna go all the way to the bottom, you gotta be technically able to do it. So if you're going to deep dive on every item, you're just going to burn yourself out. But when you do put on the scuba gear and you decide to go into the detail, you can't bullshit it. That's when you show your engineering chops. And if you are bullshitting it, if you're pretending you know what you're talking about, your team are going to see it immediately. So the job is a lot about delegating, monitoring your radar screens. When things are going okay, let the team get on with it. But then when you got to deep dive, you put on the deep sea diving gear and you got to go down. And so a lot of it is the instinct to pick up which are the items that I need to deep dive on. But if you do it everywhere, you get burned out. And many people do, trust me. So many car projects start with a chief vehicle engineer, and after 6 months or 9 months, guess what? They get switched out.
Yeah.
I can probably tell you what's happened.
Yeah. Interesting. When you went from Qashqai to Zoe, did you have any experience in electric vehicles at all?
Nada. Zilch.
Okay. So give me the biggest in-your-face surprise about that process.
Just to qualify what I said, I went onto that project in 2008. Back then, nobody had any experience in electric vehicles.
Right.
There were the team who had worked on the GM EV1 back in the 90s. There were a couple of dudes in Tesla who were kind of, starting to work on the S, and there were my colleagues in Nissan. So nobody had experience. So it wasn't unusual that, that I should have zero experience. Now, to answer your specific question, what was the biggest surprise? The biggest surprise was that it's not the batteries and the electric motor that's the hard bit. The biggest surprise was that's relatively easy, right? The bit you think is going to be tricky, like that big ass battery under the floor and making the traction motor work, that actually wasn't the hard bit. The hard bit is everything that goes around it. The hard bit is braking. The hard bit is air conditioning. The hard bit is figuring out, how do I power the 12-volt electrical systems? So it's actually the ancillaries, it's the stuff around the powertrain. That was my biggest wake-up call, and I think it's still underestimated in the industry. So I tell people starting EV projects, don't worry about the batteries and motors, they'll take care of themselves. Worry about everything else.
They just announced yesterday, Ford announced that in North America, they are going to begin to adopt what they are calling the NACS, North American Charging Standard, more commonly known as the Tesla charger. In Europe, they, from what I understand, they forced Tesla to use the CCS type charger, standardizing it across Europe. Is it all of Europe, or is it just some countries? I don't want to get that wrong.
Basically all of Europe. And
Basically all of Europe.
That took years. That was a huge battle between the French and German makers. But yeah, it's basically standard in Europe. And when I say Europe, I'm including the United Kingdom. They're still part of the continent.
Yeah. And so we who know a lot about this stuff, or at least like to think we do, think that is a better system. have all chargers work for all vehicles, right? Because brand-specific chargers are a waste of resources. If you're trying to get a large population to buy electric cars, then, imagine you could only fill up your Renault at a Renault gas station and your Porsche at a Porsche gas station. I mean, how stupid would our landscape look? It would be ridiculous. But now Ford has gone, you know what, we are going to go with this other standard, abandoning the CCS. Now they're going to give us an adapter. They're giving us an adapter, so it's not going to no longer work on those stations, but they've now kind of switched to this other standard. Do you think that this is wise? Do you think that that America should force one standard like Europe has? From someone who's integrated a charging system into a vehicle before, what do you think about that choice?
Right. I'm going to give you two answers. And first of all, I'm not going to permit myself as some European to make a comment on what you guys do in North America.
What do you think about guns?
Can I make some comments on President Trump? Would that be okay?
Please.
No, more seriously, obviously, as an engineer, it drives me crazy when we have different standards around the world, right? The fact that we have CCS, the fact that we still have CHAdeMO in Japan, the fact that the Chinese government has insisted on another standard, and that there's two standards in the States. I mean, that's crazy. We should have one standard. It's going to be a benefit to consumers around the world. It's going to be cheaper. It's going to be more reliable, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But I'm now going to contradict myself by saying, here's the thing. I know so many friends in the US who drive Teslas. And I say to them, have you not considered like some really cool Hyundai products, or, the Mach-E is a cool product, Taycan? So many times they said to me, Dave, yeah, the car is great, but the charging experience at Tesla still kicks ass. So there's a de facto, Tesla, rightly or wrongly, invested in a unique proprietary standard back in 2010. And customers like it. So I understand completely. I understand the temptation to Jim Farley, and it's more a reflection on the other standards that it has not been able to overtake Tesla and give a better user experience. That's a pity.
Yeah, it's DVD and Blu-ray. It's like Tesla made the DVD, and
I mean I hope but you also have to sort of understand that. Not you. I mean, you certainly understand. I mean, the royal you has to understand that one of the reason it's so much better is because it only has to work on Teslas. If it has to work on everything, there's almost no way it's going to work as well as when it just has to work on Teslas. That's the nature of that system.
Well, because both systems are optimized, the charger and the car that it's charging.
Yeah, and the billing goes through the car. There's no credit card. There's no RFID reader. It's all just one. As we talked about with Ali from Range, that's a closed loop system, and when you have to make it work for everybody, there's almost no way it could be as efficient and good and slick as it is, right?
Yeah, but I mean, the subject of infrastructure in general, I know we're telling the listeners stuff they know already, but I mean, it is now it is the challenge. The challenge is not energy density or cost, etc. It's when you're in a part of the world where there's a dense, well-developed charging infrastructure. I'm thinking about the Bay Area. I'm thinking about Norway. I'm thinking about Portugal here in Europe. When you drive an EV in those areas, it's such a seamless, easy experience. But then when you go to a country, and I'm going to pick on Germany, for example, because Germany has a surprisingly bad EV charging network, it's a nightmare. You're having to plan your trips and get out Google Maps and make sure you got your thing planned out. So it really is the deal breaker. And what's interesting is to see so much investment going into the infrastructure, and that's really, really encouraging. National government still haven't got that message though.
In your opinion, is the difference between countries that do it well and countries that do not do it well the government's understanding of the needs and the appropriate incentives and the appropriate investment, or is it that private industry is doing a better job in those countries?
unfortunately, it's largely government driven. But note the two countries I mentioned in Europe, right? Norway and Portugal. You'll notice that there are no famous Norwegian or Portuguese car makers, right? There are none. So Germany, for example, let's not forget they invented the car. So the German government was very slow to get off the mark in investing in charging infrastructure, partly because, this is going to shock you guys, they had a huge industry to defend that was building internal combustion engine cars.
Right.
So it wasn't in the national interest to invest massively in EVs when you're making a ton of money out of building piston engine cars.
Right. Here in America, Volkswagen had to invest in EVs as a punishment. Literally, the Electrify America network is punishment for Dieselgate. It's like, that tracks. That definitely tracks. And in the book, you talked about, I forget if it was your decision or someone else's decision when you were doing the Zoe, to physically send teams out to test every charger. Was it around Paris, right? It was thousands of chargers.
Definitely not my decision. I was the victim of that, Matt.
Yeah, I read that story and I got stressed while reading it.
So I'm going to name check again my old boss, Carlos Tavares, now big boss at Stellantis. He basically lost patience with us. We were reporting to him weekly that we got problems with these chargers, we got this software patch, we're fixing it, boss, it'll be better next week. And basically, he lost it at one stage and said, cut your bullshit, get out there, test every charger. And we said to him, okay, boss, you do know there's like 4,000 chargers in Paris. And he basically said, I don't care. Test them all. And we did. We had 15 cars, and we basically got in the cars, myself and my immediate team. We split Paris up. We got like a big-ass street atlas of Paris, and 24 hours a day, we just ran the cars, went in and connected them to every charge point, so that we could go back and have some, here's the report, here's the ones that didn't work, and this is why, and this is how we're going to get them fixed. It was incredible.
Would you also have to then drive down the charge in between those stations? Because if you're just going charger, the battery on the car will remain full and it won't behave the way that a car would behave if you pulled up to it with a low battery. So you'd have to drive like extraneous miles or kilometers in between the sessions.
Well, luckily, we figured out that the particular phenomenon we were looking at, which was a very complex effect of an electrical spike on the ground of the power supply of the charge station, would happen within the first 10 minutes of charge. So it wasn't like it was going to happen after 5 hours. So all we had to do was drive a few miles between charge points, luckily, hook it up for 10 minutes, basically sit in a cafe, drink a coffee, then move it on a couple miles. So I almost died from caffeine poisoning.
Oh, God.
The glamorous world of pre-production testing. The other thing I thought that was a funny anecdote that you talk about in the book was the balance between needing support from the brass to continue the Alpine project, understanding that the way you were going to get that support is by allowing them to drive the cars and enjoy that for themselves, and being very concerned that if they drive the cars, they're going to crash them. They're not very good drivers. They don't really, they're driving these pre-production mules that are probably millions of dollars of hand-built, whatever each. And so I thought that to be very funny, because I would assume if I ran a car company, I'd want seat time in everything. But you actually were in a position to say, no, you can't have that, which is funny.
And that was the difficulty, right? Because we had very senior executives, and full respect to them, very senior executives who worked for years in this car company making small family cars, right? So they'd driven a ton of front-wheel drive Euro hatches, and they were very competent, but many of them had never driven a rear-wheel drive car with, more than 200 brake horsepower. And, so some guy with a fancy title like a executive vice president so-and-so would call me up and say, oh, Dave, can I come out and test one of your cars next week? And I'd have to say, that'll be a no.
Yeah.
So it was pretty delicate. But like you said, the only way we could keep the project on track was to allow the really influential ones a certain amount of access to the car. So it's kind of like, drug addicts. We had to give them a little bit of the drug, but not enough to kill them.
Right. And what was, when people that had mainly driven these family cars, when they got in it, were they just like, eyes on fire, sort of like that scene in Ford versus Ferrari when Matt Damon takes out the guy who plays Henry Ford II and he starts crying?
Oh, it's blown. I mean, I had the opportunity of demonstrating that car to so many people who'd never driven something similar. And the big goofy smiles on people's faces. But it could be terrifying as well. I mean, I remember one event, this was just pre-production, we're really the last polish before start of production. We did a demonstration at our handling track where we had a Cayman, we had an Alfa 4C, we had an Audi TT, we had all the competitors and the very top brass. So we had a Nissan executive who shall remain nameless, and he got in the car. I was in the passenger seat, so he said, "Hi Dave, let's go." And we drove out of the pits, and it was raining, right? That nasty kind of spotting rain. And my fault. This is 100% my fault. As we drove out of the pits, I noticed the guy was driving with both hands together at 12 o'clock on the street.
Oh, that's not a good sign. Yeah, not a good sign. Yeah.
Right?
That's like how you can feel when you can feel. You alluded earlier, and other people have said it, and I've said it. You can get the gist of a car in 50 feet. Same thing goes for a driver. You can get the gist of a driver in 50 feet, and I have gotten in cars with those people where I immediately go, I have made a mistake.
Yeah,
getting
you should
in this
never
car.
operate a car like that.
But here's where I went wrong, Matt. I had that gist in like 15 feet, but for whatever reason, I was being too diplomatic. He's a big dog. I'm trying to be nice. I'm trying to impress him, so I didn't say anything. And all I had to say was, look, just put your hands like either side. You'd be more comfortable. I said nothing. So we set off, and the rain's getting worse, and there's this downhill off-camber right-hander. It's got no runoff. It's just got a metal rail. And as we come into it, I said to him, look, you might want to just lift off a little bit here because this one's tricky. Just watch it. He just turns it in, right, like this. So he's got one elbow.
Oh, my God.
And the guy's a little bit overweight, right? So his elbow was immediately locked into his gut.
Oh, man.
And as he turned in, the car just lets go. It just snapped, just went. And all I could see was the steel barrier coming towards me, thinking, game over, it's gone. Luckily, the traction control system, the hand of God came down from above. Thank you, Robert Bosch GmbH.
Our Lord Bosch.
Our Lord Bosch came and saved it, and it just got it right. And the guy just looked across at me and said, wow, I don't know how I caught that. And I was like, dude, you did not
catch that.
No, he went home and he told people he was amazing.
He called that drifting.
Oh, my
God.
God.
That was a drift he did. Yeah, that's scary. That's scary shit, man.
That was my fault. 100% my fault.
Politeness. Politeness is how the serial killer gets in your house. Politeness is,
There's nothing behind his eyes, but he's smiling.
Yeah, politeness. A lot of bad shit happens because we don't want to be rude to this person, and that's 100%. The guy who's going to stab you when you go get him a glass of milk in the kitchen.
I mean, I do think that even if you had told this gentleman to put his hands at 9 and 3, he still would have made the same driving mistake and probably been unable to catch it. Yeah. So don't put too much blame on yourself.
Well, at least if he wasn't locked in with like his elbow on his stomach, he might have had some chance. But anyway, our friends from Germany. This podcast is sponsored by Robert Bosch GmbH.
When you said you had some competitive cars, the TT, the Cayman, the 4C, whatnot. Did you guys tear those cars down as well, or just have them to drive for dynamic comparison?
Yeah, and how hard did you laugh when you tore down the 4C?
Well, we didn't have to tear it down. It dismantled itself. Sorry. You know what? We didn't, and the reason we didn't tear them down, two reasons. One was simply going back to what we talked about earlier, frugality, right? We were trying to be very careful with the dollars, so we didn't spend the money, and we also knew the masses of those cars. We knew we weren't going to learn a lot from ripping them apart, so we didn't. But we spent a lot of time. I mean, it came down to really deeply benchmarking two cars. Actually, we drove the 4C and quickly realized how limited it was. But the two standout
very diplomatic of you. It was.
Were obviously the Cayman. I mean, huge respect. I love those cars to bits, still do. And actually, the Lotus Exige. That was the other kind of hardcore end. So the A110, if you wanted to drive it, describe it to someone who can't drive it, it's kind of somewhere between those two cars. It's somewhere between a Cayman and a hardcore Exige.
We're gonna Zach and I are coming to the UK for Goodwood actually this summer. I think it's
looks
I
good.
think it's gonna
Looks like
happen.
it's gonna
It
happen.
looks good, and I'm gonna make some phone calls and try to get a little bit of seat time in an A110. I'm sure there's one. I heard there was actually a pink press car around, which has my name all over it.
Dan Neal
drove it.
Yeah.
I think there is a pink press car somewhere, and I want to try it very badly.
I'm sure that my ex-colleagues from Alpine would welcome you with open arms. If you don't get the right answers, talk to me and I'll hook you up.
Yeah, thanks. No, I it's the kind of thing, like, we haven't been to England in a few years, since before COVID, and like since then, things have happened that we need to really catch up on.
Whole cars have been built.
Whole cars
and received many accolades. We're like, oh, that wasn't there when we were there
we need to do
6 years ago.
those things, yeah. And so now you're a writer. You wrote a book. You're writing for the Intercooler. How are you? Zach, actually, when Zach read your book, he pulled a highlighter out and highlighted exactly one sentence. And that one sentence.
I don't remember doing this.
You highlighted
couple?
Unless you didn't, and this book comes highlighted.
No, I did it. I just don't remember doing it.
The sentence
which is
that
my
he
life.
highlighted here is, "Motoring journalists are far from stupid." That's the one sentence
I did that 'cause it was
highlighted
funny.
in the book.
But you had some great gentle digs in there about motoring journalists, and they're accurate too. Like about paddle shifted transmissions and other things. It was really funny.
Yeah, but I just wrote that line in there because I was thinking, damn, if I keep having to go at journalists, one day I may be on the Smoking Tire podcast. This is great.
You got to say one nice thing in there.
Well, guess what? Now you're at the Intercooler, and now you're one of us. So welcome to the team. And no, I don't think you actually. You didn't. I don't think you dug. I think any dig at motoring journalists was completely fair and earned in the book. But how are you enjoying your writing career? It's different from engineering and building, is it not?
No, but first of all, man, it's very kind of you to call me a writer, but I don't think I've earned that title yet.
I think you earned it on page 240 of your book.
No, I really do consider myself an engineer scribbling, really. And that's what I do for the Intercooler, right? Because the Intercooler, it's got a ton of super famous, top level European journalists writing there. It's quite a scary roster to see the kind of team. So I'm kind of the team geek, right? So I write technical articles going on about starter motors and fuel injection and stuff like this. So I don't consider myself a real writer. I'm more an engineer who sometimes picks up a pen.
Well, there's some very talented people that do that, and the people who do it that we like, do it really well and make otherwise mundane things seem very, very interesting, such as cost analysis of cars. Or our friend Bozy writes about the fine art of filing patents and and digs through patent drawings for stuff. But I agree. The Intercooler is a heavy roster with Frankel and Catchpole and Prosser and all of those guys. Steve Sutcliffe. And every time I'm on a gig with one of them, I was just down where I got your email from with Andrew Frankel in Atlanta driving Bentleys, and part of me was like, and Henry was there as well, and part of me was like, oh great, the 2 reviews will go up, and one will be mine, and one will be fucking Frankel's, and his will be like beautiful, and he's driven every pre-war Bentley that there is, and I'm like, this guy was on meth, but it's always fun and educational to hang out with those guys as well, because they're so experienced.
But can you imagine how scary it is, man, to submit? Like, I sit down and I write something about, I don't know, the importance of the starter motor, right? And then I submit it to the intercooler, and it's sub-edited by Franco with his beautiful English. So, like, I'm just terrified I made some terrible spelling or grammar mistake, so... It's kind of scary.
As long as you got that right. Actually, I did enjoy that starter motor piece. That was very good. It really it made the difference when it came to women driving cars, which was extremely important.
And it's what killed the Gen 1 EV. You could argue was the invention of the starter motor. That's what really put the nail in the coffin for the the first time around.
Yeah, all the ads, and there's a bunch of examples in David's piece, but a lot of the advertising for EVs in the 1910s were really about, like a woman can just get in it and drive it, because it's like...
Because you don't have to hand crank
this thing.
Yeah.
It's and now it's obviously a no-brainer.
Tired of family members being killed by the starter motor in your internal combustion engine from kickback?
But that's actually a real fun series to write. So the series is called Breakthroughs. It was Andrew's idea. I can't take credit for it. But the idea is to pick the 20, 30, 40 major innovations through the history of the automobile, be it unitary construction, the starter motor, fuel injection, airbags, ABS, and talk about them. Talk about them, the technical side of it, but also a little bit the historical side, and try and make it not too dry. That's the challenge, right? Because writing about engineering, it can be boring. So the
you do a great job at that, though. I think you do a great job of keeping it entertaining, grounded, and not too dry. I mean, I'm telling listeners, your book was really enjoyable. It was very entertaining to read, and also very educational. It was just a great balance.
Well, thank you, guys. And so if Andrew or Dan are listening, I just want to let you know that my request for a pay rise will be coming in the next couple of days.
We've got a few questions for you from our fans on the Patreon. Of course, if you want to ask questions of our guests, get the show ahead of schedule, get an ad-free listening experience, patreon.com/The Smoking Tire Podcast is where you do it. Okay. Let's see. Well, Lucas, I think his question has a not a straightforward answer, but I'll let David answer it because maybe he'll be more eloquent about it. Lucas says, how do ultra-low volume cars, such as the Hennessy Venom GT, get around crash testing actual cars but are still road legal? The Venom GT is titled as a Lotus Elise. That's how. It's a modified car. It is not that is not a production car. So they made a production run of them, but when you go to sell someone a Venom GT, that title will say 2005 Lotus or whatever. But there's also in America, the Ultra Low Volume Vehicle Act that allows small manufacturers to produce Caterhams, Cobra replicas, and such, right? Anything to add to that?
No, exactly. So there's kind of two categories, really. And thanks for the question. Either, as Matt says, you're actually kind of rebodying or recycling older cars. So the Hennessy is an example of that. So is the Caterham, right? Because the Caterham was type approved, back in the 15th century. Singer is another example, right?
Actually, the Caterham was originally powered by a human dragging bodies away from plague. That was the first Caterham. They made carts.
Bring out your dead.
Do you like Caterhams? Are you a Caterham? And I know that there was some drama with Alpine and Caterham in the development of that car, but talking specifically about the 7 and its variants. Are you a fan?
Of course, you gotta love Caterhams, but and I'm going to put a but on it. And I was actually talking to the CEO of Caterham, who's a good buddy of mine, a guy called Bob Lashley, really nice guy. He's only recently been CEO of Caterham. He's got some really interesting plans for the company. The problem I've got is I'm also a motorcyclist. I love my motorbikes. So I kind of always say to Bob, look, the problem is it's too like a bike. Like the sensations are so raw, so close that, you know, it is a 4-wheel motorcycle and I got a 2-wheel motorcycle. That's the problem. But I love them. Yeah. So we're just saying to close off that question. So either it's older cars, and like Singers are a good example of that, right? Singers are officially, they're all 964s. So they've already been type approved or homologated way back, or they're ultra low volume. There are no other workarounds these days. It's pretty strict. So even a car like Gordon Murray's T50 hypercar, only going to be 100 of them built. They've done a full physical crash test program. There's no other way to sell them in the US.
Right, and that process is very, very expensive.
Oh, yes, sir.
And that's why those cars are $3 million. And Caterhams, I'm with you. It is very close to a motorcycle experience, and in some ways even less comfortable. My favorite Caterham is seeing someone else drive a Caterham like a maniac. I'm not I'm too tall and fat for them. Even they have an America spec one. They make an American version that's like 4 inches wider.
You are the roll cage that protects the Caterham.
It's not for me. I get it, but it's not for me. Okay, wait. A lot of words in Joel's question here. So let's see what I can pull from it. To David, your book made me realize that I should really be in automotive engineering. I just made the shift and started at a well-known truck manufacturer, as it was the only option where I live. I'm working as a designer, but fairly eager to get into some type of technical lead position. What is a realistic time frame from moving, quote, from the bottom into higher ranks according to your experience? I finished my master's in 2020 and have a few years of experience as a project manager at a small startup since then.
Oh, man. Well, first of all, Joel, that's unbelievable to hear that I've influenced someone in their career choice, and hey, I hope it goes really, really well for you. I'm probably a bad example because, as Matt pointed out earlier, I was really, really lucky. I kind of made it to sort of big project control really quickly. I guess it was just right time, right place, and I slept with the right people. Oh, sorry, cut that bit out.
Yeah, how is Mr. Going in bed?
I hear those eyebrows have 2 functions. So Sorry.
No. I'm a big admirer of Carlos Ghosn, but officially he's not my type. To try and answer Joel's question, so, it will come. All I would say is, have fun in what you're doing now, whether you're designing a component, part of a component, a module. Have fun, enjoy it, and the big positions will come. Don't worry too much. Don't put a stopwatch on yourself. You'll just get frustrated. And just enjoy it because you've got the coolest job in the world, sir.
And part 2, and so he says, do you see a risk of larger OEMs having many different departments for every component of a vehicle? I feel like sometimes designers and engineers optimize only their part and lose sight of how that component interacts with the rest of the vehicle, creating a suboptimal product. Examples could be packaging. It seems like EV startups are better at finding storage space than their traditional counterparts. Well, that seems like bad vehicle engineering leadership, doesn't it?
First, no, 100%. What you mentioned there, so siloing of car companies it's not your number one enemy, but it's up there in the top 3. So, the chassis guys not talking to the electrical guys, the powertrain guys being out partying, these silos can develop and you have to be constantly fighting against them. A key role to make sure that doesn't happen is the role of the packaging engineers. Sometimes they're called layout engineers, sometimes they're called architects, sometimes they're called integration engineers. It's a little known discipline, but those guys are so important to cut across the disciplines and make sure that it comes together as a whole. So if you're seeing in EV startups being really clever about things like storage solutions or, just small touches that you think that's really clever, that means they've got really good packaging engineers.
Tim says, have you ever sat in a car for the first time and immediately recognized the competitor vehicles that were benchmarked? The Corvette Z06 is an obvious one, but any less apparent examples of engineer benchmarking? The Z06 is only obvious when you drive it. Sitting in it, it doesn't. it's the dynamics of that car that remind me so much of Ferrari, less the aesthetics or the cabin. But go on, David. Your answer?
I'm trying to think, and unfortunately I've only got bad examples coming in my brain.
That's fine too. We'll take one of those.
I've got examples where I've got in vehicles and I can see what they've been trying to do and like missing quite badly. So yeah, and it's often actually EVs, and it's often EVs trying to be too sporty. So it's often they're basically trying to ape the feel of a Tesla. They're trying to do that straight line speed thing, but kind of missing it and compromising other parts of the vehicle. So yeah, I can't think of a positive example where I've got in and thought, they've really benchmarked the Cayman, they've really hit it on the nail. No, I can't. I can think of negative examples.
Aside from the charging experience, I could think of a bunch of examples where OEMs have tried to copy Tesla and not really stop to think of whether or not that was a good idea worth copying. You know, like just because Tesla did it and Tesla's popular, like let's do that. But it's actually not. That's not one of the good things about Tesla that you've gone and copied. You've copied one of the bad things.
That's not why their cars are selling.
Yeah,
people are focused on the wrong
100%.
thing.
Yeah,
100%.
Tom Rosenbaum, two-parter. The first part is answered in the book, but I'd like you to touch on it quickly. When designing a new car for a major automaker, were you basically handed a powertrain to build a car around, or did you have flexibility in choice of engine, transmission, and drivetrain? If you want to answer that, I'll ask you the next part. Yeah.
Yeah, basically the second choice. So the Qashqai and the Alpine A110 are two good examples there where we basically had access to the Nissan, Renault, and partly the Daimler powertrain lineup, but the vehicle project chooses the powertrain. Nobody comes and says, you got to use the 1.8 liter such and such. So that's part of the job, is selecting the right powertrain within the lineup. The Zoe is a different example where there was no powertrain. You couldn't just say, I'll take that electric motor, because nobody had them. So we had to go out and develop it from scratch, in that case with Continental. But yeah, you basically choose the powertrain. That's part of the job. Nobody can really impose it on you. You don't design a car around a given powertrain.
And part two is, after having worked at Nissan, do you have any insight as to why the brand is so hell-bent on using CVT transmissions for the vast majority of its production cars? Enthusiasts do not like the CVT.
No. The short answer is going to be no. I understand the CVT in Japan, right? And I understand its application in small cars. I get it.
What about why in Japan? What do you understand about the CVT in Japan specifically?
Because CVTs work quite well in really light cars, because you don't have that inertia problem. You don't get that horrible whining noise. So in light cars with low inertia in urban situations, that horrible put your foot down and it's just going, that's not so much of an issue in urban driving. So it's not a bad solution for basically Japanese urban cars.
Oh, that's so
It's
interesting.
a terrible solution everywhere else. So no, I haven't got a good explanation for that one.
Oh, so Nissan is Detroiting. You know, that's when in the 60s, Detroit built cars that were amazing in Detroit and awful everywhere else. And that's what they're doing. Okay. Nissan, come take a trip to America and see how your gearbox works over here. It's not great.
They'll just be shocked at what Altima drivers do here.
Yeah. Aaron Geiger.
So fast.
Really liked your book. And says you've managed many teams during your career. What lessons learned can you share on managing and coaching big teams?
Ooh, wow. Thank you, Aaron, for the question. And man, if you asked the poor folks who had to work for me, they'd probably think that the number one lesson I should have learned better was more patience. But I think we touched on it earlier, especially and I'm talking about technical projects, right? Be it cars, aircraft, trains. That point about delegation, you have to learn to let go and trust the people who are working for you. If you don't trust them and you're double checking everything, like I said, you're going to burn yourself out. B, you're going to have a mutiny because they're not going to trust you. They're not going to appreciate you double checking their work. So that's probably the number one lesson is trust the folks around you and help them out. Learn to pick out those areas where they need your help. But if you're double checking everything, you're just gonna melt down.
Yeah, good one. I'm not sure if you'll have an answer to this one because you don't work for either of the companies that they ask about, but maybe
go for it. I like this
maybe
one.
we could try. Christian says, what would the business case be for Volkswagen killing the e-Golf or Chevy killing the Volt? They are great size and affordable. I think Chevy was losing money on the Volt, frankly, and but I that's speculation. I loved the Volt. I thought it was a great car. Any insight there, possibly?
Yeah, I think we can have like you said, I've never worked for either of those companies, so I have no insider knowledge, but I think we can make a reasonable surmise that the e-Golf really sold in tiny numbers. It never took off because it was clearly a conversion, right? It was just a Golf where they'd kind of ripped out the piston engine and made an experimental fleet. So they were just doing tiny volumes. There was no way to amortize the investment. The Volt, I'm going to guess, was probably a unit cost problem. It was probably an expensive vehicle to engineer at the time. Again, remember, it was one of the first kind of PHEVs, so it had a relatively expensive combustion powertrain plus a relatively expensive battery and motor. So I think that vehicle probably lost money because of the cost of manufacturing it.
Which, by the way, is probably why you should buy one used. I think if a company is losing money on the car, it's probably better made than other products from that company. I had both generations of Volt, and I remember even just when I owned it being like, even at $37,000, they are losing money on this car.
Well,
it is
so I found a
too
report.
good of a car.
Reuters said in 2012 that GM might be losing 50 grand on every Volt.
50? 50?
And then it was Reuters calculated they were losing as much as $49,000 on every plug-in Volt that it sold.
Yeah,
and then
buddy.
A few years later, in 2016, this is a report by Electrek, GM was losing about 9 grand for every Bolt EV before the credit. So both were expensive to engineer and produce, and I think that answers that.
Yep. And I think Volkswagen I think they have an electric Golf-sized ground-up vehicle probably in the pipeline. I don't think they're just going to kill the e-Golf without having some kind of fully engineered replacement.
Well, you know what's amazing to me, incomprehensible to me, is they've now got their full ID lineup, right? So you could say an ID3 is an electric Golf, right? So they've got the ID3, 4, 5, right to 7. I do not understand, because Volkswagen has officially announced there will not be a next Golf, right? They've said that publicly. I do not understand why you would not basically replace the ID3 with a properly engineered electric Golf. Trading on 50 years of an awesome brand name, but designed it from ground up. I do not understand that decision by Volkswagen. I'm sure they're clever folks and they're doing something. They've got some strategy, but they've lost.
Have you driven an ID4? I'm not so sure.
Have you tried to use any of the functions inside?
I would question the cleverness.
Try to adjust the temperature. See how long it takes.
No, but I'm talking
nighttime.
about the next ID, so the replacement to the current ID3, right?
Yeah.
Why the hell would you not call that the electric Golf?
Yeah.
I would.
You have
if
all
I
that
had
brand
kind
cachet.
if I had 50 years of brand behind a product, I'd find a way to keep it alive.
For sure.
For example of this, Ford. And the new Mustang is not a Mustang. Sean Smith says, what is the most, this is an interesting one. What is the most time or resource consuming thing you have worked on that people think is simple or don't think about at all? He follows that up. I worked engine calibration for Toyota for 5 years and spent 8 months on engine startability. Temperatures ranging from minus 35 to 40, 5 different fuel blends, etc. People are always blown away when I tell them the complexity of simply starting a car.
Sure, for sure. Two immediately jump into mind. One is what's sometimes called perceived quality. Some companies call it craftsmanship. So gap and flush tuning. So just getting the gap and flush right around light clusters, switch gear. I mean, oh my God, the time that takes, the iterative drive fits, joint checks with the suppliers, strip and build of cars, the hours, the days, the weeks spent in the plant, just getting that last 0.1 taper gap that probably nobody will notice, but you got to do it anyway. That's one. In more recent times, of course, the issue is final software integration, by which I mean it's not getting the software to function. It's not like getting the gauges to function or the charger to function. It's chasing out those final bugs. So the time spent in getting rid of those bugs, basically the stuff that's annoying us all on more recent vehicles where they're buggy as hell, and the OTA is not working properly. That is incredibly time consuming.
In my experience, EVs have been buggier than internal combustion cars. Is that, and that's only my experience. I don't know if there's any data on that or whatever, but it's just been my experience. Is there a relationship between EVs and bugginess, or is it just coincidence because EVs are using all of the available tech, whereas some internal combustion cars, they're kind of holding back?
Yeah, I think you're saying two things. So first of all, I think the EV itself isn't causing that bugginess because, Sean would probably agree with me on this. Calibrating a battery and an electric motor just as a powertrain system, it's easier than calibrating a modern piston engine. I'm going to stretch my head out, put my neck on the block and say that's true. So the powertrain itself is not causing it. I think we're seeing a combination of two things. EVs tend to put all the tech in, right? Be it touch screens, advanced ADAS, driver aids, they tend to go heavy on the tech. But we're also seeing, Matt, and that's probably a whole other podcast we'd have to do, we're seeing the implementation of OTA driving a lot of that bugginess. So there's kind of two philosophies out there. There's the Tesla philosophy, which says, look, we're going to commit to full OTA. We know there's going to be bugs, but we're going to over-the-air update everything. And everything means not just the infotainment system, but the braking system, the airbag system, the powertrain system, everything. If we go back to Volkswagen and the ID series or the Golf 8, Volkswagen have done half and half OTA. So some of the systems can be upgraded OTA, but the safety systems can't. For the safety systems, you got to go to the dealer. So that's what I think it's more that what's showing the perceived bugginess of recent vehicles. It's not the EV powertrains in of themselves, I think.
My Ford Mach-E is half and half as well. And there are updates, certain updates that are mostly feature-based updates that are OTA, and some things I do have to go to the dealer for. And what we're learning about going to the dealer when the vehicle has to be updated on through the OBD2 port is that port was never designed to flow the amount of data that it really needs to update a car like a Mach-E. And I don't know, you probably know, what is the flow rate, the data flow rate of OBD? Do you know the flow, how much?
I don't know the bit rate off the top of my head, but it was never designed, right? OBD's been around a while. To your point, it was never designed to update, complex infotainment systems.
It's shockingly low. I mean, it goes back to 1995. So to update a system where you're talking about gigabytes of data, my car at one point had to be plugged in for 3 days. That was ridiculous.
And I mean, to me, that so-called half and half OTA that we're seeing, and I hate this term, guys, forgive me, for the legacy car makers adopt. To me, that's kind of the worst of both worlds. What we're seeing there is, you mentioned it earlier, Matt, they're chasing Tesla because they recognize that they have to have OTA systems, but they've not taken the brave pill of saying, okay, you know what? We're going to take the legal risk here, because it's a legal risk, not a technical risk, of doing OTA for everything. So we're going to make Matt come back to the dealer for certain things. So he's got to bring the car in. He's got to make it, the dealer guy might not know how to do it. So this half and half situation is really problematic at the moment. And, all you got to do is type Golf 8 bugs into a search engine and hit send, and you'll see many, many, many very angry Golf owners saying, this is the last time I'm going to buy a Volkswagen product. And if you go through why is that, a lot of it is this half and half OTA system.
Yeah,
hey, that's a whole other podcast in itself.
The bugginess of the OTA with the clunkiness of having to go into the dealer for crucial updates and large files. That makes sense. That is a worst of both worlds kind of scenario for sure. Yeah, that's.
And I understand why. There's lots of good reasons, as always. The engineers behind these, they're not stupid people. They're not doing this to annoy us, but it's not satisfactory at the moment. We have to find a better way.
Right. Two more, and then we are out of here. Matt Stetler says, how much work and thinking goes into repairability and parts availability during the engineering process?
I'm going to say it depends on the OEM. Some are better than others. I'm not going to mention the bad ones, but I will tip my hat to my old company, Nissan, for example, did spend a lot of time on repairability, and generally you find you can wrench on Nissans with pretty simple tools, right? You can do a lot with a bunch of standard sockets. There's not any fancy fasteners in there. So it is considered to be important, but there is massive variation between OEMs. Mm-hmm. Some pay less attention than others.
Yeah, which region of Bavaria tends to make the cars more complicated?
Last one, Michael Cosgrove said, and this is a good one. Do you have any insightful perspectives on why Lotus and Renault Alpine decided not to pursue a joint sports car project?
I don't. I'm still in touch with my buddies at Alpine, but we make a point of, I make a point of not getting them too drunk so they tell me the corporate secrets these days. I don't have any insight in what's going on there, but all I can say is I'm super disappointed because I think there's a huge gap there for fun, lightweight EVs. If there were any two teams, like if you were to pick the two teams that were going to solve that problem, it was going to be Lotus and Alpine. So to me, it was a kind of a dream team combination. I was super keen to see what they cooked up. So I'm disappointed that it seems to have come to an end. But there's a gap there, folks. There's a gap there for the first proper lightweight EV sports car. And there's some cool things happening that I can't talk about tonight.
Well, before we get out of here, and I really appreciate you taking the time. It's been a really interesting show, and I loved your book, Inside the Machine. Everyone should go buy it. First go with the independent book resellers, and then go to Amazon after that. Support your local bookstore if you can. And we'll put a link to buy in the show notes, won't we, Zach?
Sure. It's already in the thing.
It's already in there? Mm-hmm. Okay, great.
Or you can just borrow Zach's copy.
Or I can borrow. We'll just pass around. Yeah, we'll pass around Zach's copy. I will give first. This is always turns into a problem. I don't want to say first person to DM me after this show will get the book, but
DM you on which app? Instagram, Twitter.
First person to comment on the YouTube video that wants the book, I will send the book to anyone in America with Zach's hilarious highlighting. Last question,
I
David.
Keep my book.
Before we get out, you want your book back? All right, never mind. I'll buy you a book.
I'm sure I can get you guys a couple copies.
No. We want to sell. We want to sell books. We don't want to take free books. We want to sell books. What is in David Twig's garage? We heard about a bike, but there wasn't anything specific. What are you driving?
All right, so let's get the real predictable, boring one out of the way. We talked a little bit that I do a little bit of journalism in my spare time. So obviously, as you know, all automotive journalists get paid by Porsche to drive 911s. Yes. So I've got the mandatory 911 in the garage. Mine's an old one. It's a 1980 3-liter SC. I've stripped a bit of weight out of it. It's coming in just over a metric ton, and it's set up for like tarmac rallies, which are really popular here in Europe. So that's my baby. That's my
good times. Okay. Points. Thumbs up for point for one.
Now my second car is again some weird Euro box that you guys have never heard of, but it's a little Peugeot hatchback. Some of you guys may know the 205 GTI famous.
Oh yeah.
Now it's not one of those. It's the 106 GT. It's the 106 Rally that came just after the 205. That's the one which I was.
That's it without wheels.
It's
a lightweight model.
That's a little bit yesterday. So that car tips the scales at 800 kilos, which is about 1,800 pounds, 100 brake horsepower. It is a hoot. It is a
Great.
fantastic car. Super rare in the US. There are probably none there, but it's just a fantastic little thing to buzz around in.
Cool. That's a good one.
How long
All
have you
right.
had that car? Is that 20 years,
You
or
know,
you
I
just got
bought
it
that
recently?
car when I bought it when I came back from the States, because they're disappearing quickly. So I bought it just over 2 years ago. Managed to find one without too much corrosion, and it's an absolute hoot. So if you guys are in the UK, I'm going to try and see if I can get someone in the UK club to give you guys some wheel time in one of these things.
That'd be so
a
cool.
good time. Yeah, we don't have enough French hatchback time. We need more.
We have
I've
very
driven the Megans that they have to rent at the Nürburgring. You know, the ones with the cages and the sticky tires at RSR. I've driven those, and they're all right. You know, they're not much different from what you'd get in like a Focus ST or something like that. They're pretty. But I've heard the 80s and early 90s ones. Those are the ones that you want.
And what I love about these, you know, there are blue collar sports cars in the US, you know, the Chargers, the Mustangs, you know, the ordinary guy and girl's car that didn't cost a ton of money. It was just a hoot to drive. The European equivalent of those are these tiny little hot hatches.
Yeah.
This is a European Mustang. And I love them for that.
Every time I'm in Europe, I see one of these being driven by an absolute maniac.
A 17-year-old just sending it.
Yeah. And then what was the bike?
The bike, well, I'm a long-term Yamaha guy, so I just love my Yamahas. I've had a series of R1s over the years. Like a fool, I sold my really original 1998 R1, so I actually haven't got a bike in the garage at the moment, but my wife is also a big bike fan, so she's got 2 bikes, and if I behave myself, she lets me borrow them from time to time. So she's got one of those little Ducati Scramblers, which is really nice.
Oh, they're a
And
good time. Yeah, they're fun. Yeah.
she's got a beautiful 1992 bone stock original Honda Fireblade.
Oh, those are cool too. Yeah, those are very collectible. That's rad. Awesome. Well, this was such a pleasure. Read David's work over at the Intercooler. Subscribe. I am a subscriber. It is definitely, I forget if it's $5 or £5, but whatever it is, 5 something per month, and it is absolutely worth the subscription. Some very talented people over there. Buy the book. It's a great read, and it helps you really understand how these cars get built. And with the crossover, the electric car, and then the sports car, it offers 3 different sort of angles on that same theme. And what a great time talking to you, David. And I hope maybe we get to see you at Goodwood this summer, possibly.
Hopefully, I'm trying to make it happen at the moment. I've got a conflict, but I'm trying to get across there. So hopefully, guys.
All right. Well, if you can, if you come to Los Angeles for any reason, absolutely let us know. Love to get you in studio.
For sure.
All right.
For sure. Thank you so much, folks, and thanks again to Zach for having picked up the book and for having lent it to Matt. Appreciate that.
Send it around the world like traveling pants.
All right.
Thanks, David.
David Twohig, ladies and gentlemen. Have a good rest of your week. We will see you next time